Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another one of our podcasts. My name is Sean Williams, and I'm the Associate Professor of Political Science here at Campbellsville University. And I am joined today by my panelists for another one of our exciting talks from the Campbellsville University Political Science Senior Seminar crew. Tonight, we are here to discuss the question of imperialist interventions in third world countries and try to understand some of their causes and some of their ramifications. Joined tonight by three of our panelists. From my left to my right, I have Rachel Wolf. Hello, Ms. Wolf.
Hi.
Joining us from our DC location, once again, we have Eli Wood and Oksana Marquez. And from here in Campbellsville, we have Jordan Duff. Mr. Duff, how are you this evening?
I'm doing awesome, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So tonight we're broadcasting from about 10 p.m. here in local Eastern time. And so as you can imagine, on the 10 p.m. on a Monday night, well, it's Monday night. So let's get started. So first of all, the topic for this evening is imperialism. But let's figure out some of the things we're talking about. So first of all, what do we mean by the term intervention? When we say that a country is intervening into another country, what does that mean? What are some of the examples?
It just sort of means that there's interference by a country into another country or state's affairs, like normally seeking to like take action to improve the situation.
I think if you want to talk about like the main types of it, I guess if you could put it into categories, someone may have a different answer, and if so, I hope they can add to it. But the three that came to mind for me were military, economic, and then cultural/political. I kind of put those together. Military, to me, military intervention would be like sending troops or equipment or training somewhere to help, I guess, if there was like some sort of conflict. Economic intervention could mean like, I guess, just purely giving economic aid, whether that's just giving money or resources, or whether that's trying to influence like an economic system, trying to introduce a new economic system to a country. And then the cultural/political intervention, I would say that's like changing the people by changing their culture, or maybe changing like their political structure, their government.
And I think, to add to what Eli said, I think military and political intervention kind of play in hand, because most of the time when there's, people use military intervention, it's usually due to different people having political ideas and views, which is causing for war to break out within the country. Maybe a dictatorship or one group, a rebel group or something has taken over based off their political ideas. So I kind of think those two kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah,
I definitely think there's a lot of overlap. Oh, sorry, Oksana.
No, you're fine. I think you just pick between like a multilateral, a unilateral like approach, and do as Eli and Jordan said.
Yeah, I think one more aspect kind of is humanitarian in a way. I'm not sure if you would categorize that as intervention, but I mean, it is technically going into another country. So, but just kind of trying to stop a genocide or something of that nature.
So in that latter category, everything from America's intervention in Sudan to interventions that did not happen, perhaps in a country like Rwanda or Ethiopia. Or Syria, as the case may be. Now, our topic today is imperialist interventions. Are all interventions imperialist in nature? I mean, I guess, Rachel, when you were talking about the idea of humanitarian interventions, that really only makes sense from a non-imperialist perspective. So could you go in without wanting to engage imperialism, or is that really the only way?
To me, I believe that's pretty much the only example we've kind of seen. But if anyone else has an example, I mean, I'd like to hear it. I think a lot of times the reason that is probably the least common form of intervention is due to that reason, that it's kind of like the only one that isn't seen as imperialist.
I think is a more like political theory answer to the question of are all interventions, imperialist. I would say there's like kind of two opposing viewpoints. You've got like the realist viewpoints that's saying all intervention is imperialist because everyone is seeking after power and they're seeking after something through their intervention. Whereas a more idealistic approach may say, while there may be some people that are doing that, there's also those who are trying to go into countries and maybe help them. But like I said, those two are kind of opposing, just the idealism versus realism.
Yeah, I think I take more of like a realism or realistic approach to it. I don't feel like any country does anything unless they think that they're going to get some sort of benefit. And they might think that the benefit's very small and like it's just going to be like, you know, a handshake and a pat on the back. But I don't feel like any country's just going to help somebody else just for the fun of it.
I was gonna agree with the same thing what Oksana said, and I think Oksana, didn't we take that class with Dr. Marino where we talked about countries doing intervention, and most of the time they're looking for something in return when they go over, whether it's resources or some sort of ally, or when they do help them at the end, it's not really of, hey, we helped you guys out, now we're out of here. There's always kind of some sort of, they keep some sort of military there, or they bring their political ideas and views over there. So it's always kind of like lingering around. They're never completely out of the country that they help.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would say like a less imperialistic approach would be like an NGO, but that's more so on the humanitarian side. So again, with what Rachel said, that may be the reason that it's the only one, because it's the least imperialistic.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with Oksana. Specifically, I think that's why you mentioned Rwanda. I think that's why there was no intervention there, was because of like what Oksana said. There's not really a benefit. And so I do think that's why humanitarian doesn't always happen, even if there is a need for it.
I want to come back to this idea that I think JD touched upon a second ago, some of the goals of intervention. But before we do, there's one more term that I want to make sure that we've had a chance to clarify. And that's the difference between an intervention on the one hand and colonization on the other. What is colonization, and are all interventions inherently colonial, or can you intervene for other reasons?
Colonialism, I think I tend to see it as just trying to exert control, political control, partial control over another country, and like occupying it or having people settle in it, or exploiting it economically. And that's kind of the definition that I sort of see it as.
Right. I would argue that colonialization or colonization is inherently like made to benefit the person who's going into the country. Whereas intervention, while that does happen, sometimes they go in for some sort of benefit. I wouldn't say that's inherent. I would say it's inherently trying to go help people.
I agree.
Now, more narrowly speaking, so bringing in the topic a little bit more, our focus this evening is mostly on the idea of intervention into third world countries. Third world is a bit of a pejorative term, maybe a better way of talking about it is to say into developing or underdeveloped countries. But the idea that there's a part of the globe that doesn't have the same degree of economic resources or political stability that you might find in Europe or in parts of Latin America or Southeast Asia. What are some of the goals of intervention? And I think y'all touched on a few. Maybe you just want to summarize those for the viewers back home.
I would argue.
Go ahead, Oksana.
I would argue that some of the goals, like when we go into like developing countries, like you said, they're not developed like larger countries. It's easier to make them look more like us. So whether that's to really like push in our influence on them and kind of get them like on a stronghold to where they depend on us, or whether that looks like trying to democratize them in a sense where there are more democracies, but what democracy looks like for America, not necessarily what democracy may look like for that country.
Right, and I think saying most of the time in interventions, like Oksana already touched, one of the main things that's going on is there's usually sometimes some type of conflict that's already going on within the country, that's causing, either people to flee to different countries, causing them to be refugees, or one rebel group has taken over, or there's a clash of political ideas, and you see these battles of two probably dictators, which is causing the country to divide. And so usually most of the times countries of higher power or bigger militaries get involved within these third world countries and try to kind of help them sort of make a foundation so that they sort of have the same political ideas that whatever country is intervening with. They sort of have the same political ideas and the same military and setup so that they can become unison, and they try to help them understand this is what needs to be done, and they kind of write out them a plan sheet of this is what needs to be done, and this is only how things are going to get solved. And they try to just make a huge plan for those guys so, that they can become successful and that the fighting can stop.
I think that it's also important, like while we are talking a lot about like political war or just political conflict in general, that also some intervention could be revolving around like maybe like a natural disaster. So it doesn't have to be inherently political, but you also have to think that there may be some political goals in there. Like maybe if some country just got destroyed by either like a hurricane or something, we go in and help them. Maybe that will help us in the future. We'll get off like a good start so that our relationship is strong, and so that maybe we can build those ties and maybe influence the culture or the politics of that country. So I think sometimes it's not just always war. Sometimes it could just be something like a natural disaster.
Yeah, like Eli said, it's sort of like, I don't know, helping somebody build a house so that way when you need somewhere to stay, you have somewhere to stay.
One of the things that you guys have themes that you have kept coming back to is the idea of changing a government, some form of regime change. Is there a relationship between democracy and imperialism, either in terms of democracies being more imperialistic or in terms of democracy as a goal of intervention?
I kind of think that what we've seen in the past is, especially with Western democratic countries, we've seen a lot more intervention from them. And I don't know whether you can say that the correlation implies causation or what, but I definitely think that there has been a trend globally that the more free countries try to impose that democracy on others, whether you see it from what Eli was talking about from an ideal point of view or a realistic way, like maybe you see that as a good thing, but I definitely think that they seem to go hand in hand so far.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that sometimes democracy can be kind of used as some sort of like, I guess, cover for imperialism. Like they put the title of, oh, we're going over to this country to promote democracy, but in reality, they're going over there to impose their way of life, and they use it as a cover. So while some people use them synonymously, they can actually be opposing forces, because as you're imperializing a country, like obviously you're taking away some form of democracy, because if it's true imperialism, then you're not really letting the people there, I guess, decide in a way what they want for the future of their country.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an interesting argument that you make, because when we talk about American interventions, for example, for people from other countries, they often look at American interventions as being imperialistic in nature or imperialistic identity. But a stated goal of the American interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, of our interventions in Germany and Japan after World War II, interventions in Latin America, we've always had the stated goal of, well, we want to make the world safe for democracy. So are you suggesting that America's stated goal is somehow inherently contradictory?
I think you could definitely say that. You could make a case for it with what Eli was just pointing out, that by going into a country and saying this is what you have to do, that's kind of the opposite of what we see a democracy as, because you're not asking the people what they want, or at least not in every case. I don't think that it's like a hard and fast rule, because maybe they want what you're going to bring, but I just think that as Eli pointed out, it can be very contradictory.
Yeah, and I think one things that the United States does as a whole is we use this big iron fist kind of thing. So, hey, look at us, look at our economy, look at the way that our country's being ruled. We're not having the same problems that you're having, so you might want to take the antics and ideas that we have in order to get your country to be more similar to us. And sometimes some of the countries, I mean, they don't want that. They want a little intervene in countries because we're just throwing these ideas necessarily onto countries, a democracy like we are, but at the same time we have to take in consideration what necessarily worked for us might not work for them based off the resources that they have.
Yeah, Oksana and I were talking just before the podcast about how America has kind of changed its role throughout history. Like when we first emerged as a sort of like, I guess, global power after World War II. Of course, we weren't in power for a long time. They say the phrase "power corrupts," because after World War II, we were new to being like just so involved globally, and so we helped rebuild Europe, for example. And that was actually more, I guess, less imperialism and more interventionism. But now we see, as we've been in power for I don't know how many years, like, and some say that's diminishing, but you see that like after a while, like now it's turned more into imperialism than it has intervention.
Yeah, with what Eli said, I think like at first maybe before we asserted our dominance and we recognized like our place and how everyone looked up to us, that we were just trying to go over there to intervene, but now we're definitely there with an imperialistic approach. And I think oftentimes maybe that's why there's a disconnect between intervention from like the American people in other countries, is because I think oftentimes we have this big bloated head and we think we can just throw this American blanket on everything and make it work. But like you can't take how we run our economy here and throw it in some West African country and then be mad that it doesn't work in a year. It's not just this blanket that you can throw on things and fix situations. So what we've done in the Middle East, like it's not just as simple as like going in there and throwing the president in power and calling it a democracy for it to work as a democracy.
You just threw out a different idea there for a second, Oksana. The notion that not only could you be going into a country to reform their political system, but you might also have the intention of going in to change their economic system. Do you feel that it is actually possible to make another country capitalist, to reform how they view production and labor in their society? Or is that kind of economic change something that can only come internally?
For me, I think that the relationship between like capitalism and imperialism is that you sort of have to have capitalism to be imperialistic, or for one to exist, the other has to. So we can go into a country, or any country can go into another country. And like, yeah, we help their economy. And like Eli said, we build up their resources, but that's because a capitalist society has to have somewhere to get more resources when theirs are depleting. And so for this capitalist circle to keep going, you have to have more and more places to get the cheapest resources possible. And I think maybe on the outside we can go in and like sort of impose capitalism, but I don't think that it sticks unless their country as a whole adapts it. We might, you know, put them on a chain to be like, for them to think that it's what they're doing and they're making all of this progress, but I think it has to come internally for it to truly be, I guess, as capitalist as we are.
JD, were you trying to jump in there for a second?
Yeah, I was about to literally say the same thing that Oksana said. So, there we go.
I guess great minds think alike.
That's what they say.
So given the fact that the United States' two primarily stated goals, and of course, we again typically don't refer to ourselves as being imperialist. But since our two stated goals are democratic reform and economic reform, how successful do you think that we have been as a country at our efforts to intervene in other nations?
I think that if you're looking at quantity, we've definitely taken the cake there. We've kind of been involved in just about every area of the world. But I think that kind of around the time of the Vietnam War, when we started trying to intervene in like the Asian countries and the Pacific, I think that we kind of started to lose our touch for imperialism. I think that as citizens started to oppose that war, as we started losing, it kind of started to be more of this global mindset, or of this national mindset of let's not have ourselves so spread out and not keep intervening in so many countries. So I think since then it's kind of been this attitude of we do still want profit, like looking for the oil in the Middle East and things like that. But I think that the general consensus of the American people is that they don't really want more intervention from America. They want things focused on domestically.
Yeah, I'm glad she brought up the example of Vietnam, because that's really important. Just like as a pure example of, like we were talking about earlier about how the U.S. after World War II, you know, kind of had this big head, like we're in charge. So I guess they kind of thought, oh, you know, with the whole, I guess it was called the domino theory of communist countries over in East Asia, thinking that, you know, if there's going to be one, there's going to be many more unless we stop it. So we went in thinking like we won't lose if we go in somewhere, but we were shown that that actually wasn't true. And so I guess that was more of like an experience to show that just because you're the #1 country at the time, or the most powerful, whatever you want to call it, at the time, doesn't mean like you can't lose. And I think like that was just a really good example. And then we see another one more recently, like in Iraq, where the U.S. you know tries to go in and impose their democracy on the Iraqi people, and it clearly didn't work. And I mean, we're still there today because I guess we refuse to just accept the fact that it didn't work. It's kind of like a ego thing.
It's interesting the way that y'all have been describing it, because on the one hand, you began with this discussion about how imperialist interventions in general, but intervention, maybe the other way around, intervention in general, but particularly imperialist ones, that there are going to be these benefits for the initiator, that a country like the United States going into another country would provide them with resources, cheap labor, cheap goods. But now you're making it sound like there are some potential real costs to intervention. On balance, do you think that these kinds of interventions are ever justified? I mean, you know, to Eli's point, is our problem that we can no longer successfully intervene in countries? Or when we went into Afghanistan, did we just make a bad choice of a country to get involved in?
I think the main problem is when we intervene with countries, it's about how we intervene. Like Oksana and I put the idea on the table earlier that we try to Americanize countries such as South Africa or Iraq, who already are having bigger problems. Try to not necessarily forcefully, but try to get it done. Not like over a couple of months or years. We throw looking at the big picture. So this is where you get the interventions. It's about how we approach these other countries in the way that we come about it. We're not really looking at the big picture. We're just trying to suck to say, but we're just trying to, we're definitely looking as Americans. We're definitely looking at something, trying to get something back out of it. We aren't helping just to be helping.
Yeah, to just go off sort of what Jordan said, I don't know if it's like a lack of ability for us to do well what we intend to do, but I think maybe you can try to be too well-rounded and not good at anything. And so like when we went to Afghanistan and the Middle East in general, like I don't think anybody knew what we were doing. I still don't think anybody knows like what we did. Like we were like opposing like Muslim fundamentalists. Like you can't go into a country that's like 90% one population and just be like, oh, like this is so bad, and divide that country even more so than they were, and pick sides here and pick sides there. Like as Jordan said, I don't think we had like a big picture of like an end goal. It was just more so like, oh, we can put here because this is a good geographical location to be, and we can go here because this is good, and we can go here because it looks good here. But as far as like being like, okay, this is what we want to accomplish when we go there, I don't think that was established. And if it was established, it wasn't given to the American people. And I think that's where sort of the opposition comes from. But I mean, I think still now, if you ask even people who are sort of like educated on the subject, like no one can give you a clear answer of like what our goal was other than to just be there. So I think like Jordan said, I don't think it's like a lack of ability, but maybe a lack of planning or lack of like long-term thinking.
Yeah, to Oksana's point, like I don't think that it would be as much of a failure if we went back. I mean, look at how successful it was when Europe colonized like different countries in Africa. I mean, then they had a clear goal of taking their resources and economic gain. And now I don't think you can really say that that's what you want to do in a country and people will support it. Not that they exactly said that back then, but now I think it's kind of more frowned upon. So like Oksana said, we didn't have a concise goal in the Middle East. We just want to be involved. And so it's a lot harder to achieve a goal if you don't have one.
Another thing that's come out of y'all's conversation so far is that even if there are benefits to the initiator of an imperialist intervention, that there's really no benefit for the target country. And yet, if you were to ask American servicemen and women who've been in Afghanistan or Iraq, they might suggest to you that, well, Afghanistan is freer now than what it was before, that certainly the rights of women have been improved in Afghanistan. I mean, is it possible to say that interventions ever work out for the benefit of the target? Or are interventions inherently going to be bad for the country that's being targeted by the initiator?
I don't think it's always the case that the target country gets the short end of the stick. I just think it's mostly the case, like, and in like saying like, okay, yeah, Afghanistan's freer and such. I just wonder like, what does that look like long term when America pulls out? And I do think there are obviously cases where, you know, like we might help a country utilize their resources better or make more money off their resources than what they would have, or we might actually like help a country reestablish their government in ways. And so I don't think that it's always that the targeted country gets the short end of the stick. I just have to wonder if, you know, part of like the imperialism of it is that, you know, they can't go too long without us. And so that's how we sort of make sure that somehow they still need us.
Yeah, and to add on to what Oksana has said, I don't think there's a case where the United States has intervened where we were able to pull out or and not have any, you know, sort of connection with the country after we have helped them. We've left something over there, you know, just to kind of make sure that, you know, it doesn't revert back before rather than leaving military forces or some sort of base or something like that. I don't know. I can't think of anything or any case where we're completely out of the country after we intervene. We're always tied to the country.
Yeah, I think what's important to one of the important differences between the whole, when we were talking earlier about the realistic versus idealistic like mindset, is like what actors are involved in this intervention. So we've mentioned a few times, I think, like international organizations or NGOs. And I think because those are inherently a gathered body of countries, they don't have one specific country like interests in mind. So those often can benefit the target more than they can the initiator. Like the UN going somewhere isn't always trying to benefit the UN unless they're trying to gain, I guess, some sort of like influence in a way. But I think like when another country is going in somewhere, obviously like they're having their best interest in mind. So it's the whole multilateralism versus unilateralism argument. Like that's what it really depends on. And that's,
I think, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that's kind of how it, like, I'm not saying it's right that countries go in with only their best in mind, but like they're supposed to be representing their people.
Yeah.
So that's how it's going to be. That's why international organizations are important.
Yeah, I think that the benefits that could come to the target are always going to be second to the benefits of the intervener. So when we were talking about humanitarian, I think there can definitely be benefits there, especially like natural disasters or ending some sort of atrocity committed by the government or something of that nature. I think that the benefits are more clear. But I think that even when, as Oksana was saying, opportunities arise from the intervention or better allocation of resources, things like that, it may be a benefit, but it might only be a small amount compared to what the intervener is getting. And I think that that's kind of the problem with it, is that no matter what good comes out of it, it's never, as they were saying, with their best interests at heart.
So given all that, how do you currently characterize our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and maybe to a lesser extent Syria, a country that we've talked about in previous podcasts? Do you feel that these are mostly imperialistic? Do you feel like that on balance, the target countries are benefiting more than they're being harmed? How do you feel that those are breaking down?
I feel that there might be minimal benefits, but I kind of feel like it's kind of been in a lose-lose almost in a way. I think that there's been some small steps taken forward that have definitely been positive. But I mean, even if you look at Afghanistan, they're still having their people being bombed very frequently. There's still a lot of human rights abuses. I think that as we were mentioning earlier, how we don't have a concise goal, I think that that's really hurting us, and it also isn't helping them.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to note in intervention with Iraq and Afghanistan specifically is just the fact that it's so much more military intervention than it is diplomacy intervention. And I think like one of the clearest ways to see that is just like straight up shifts in like funds of US taxpayer dollars going away from like the State Department, which engaged in diplomacy and conversation with people, versus the Defense Department, which has become like our new foreign affairs. You know, that's where most of that happens, is through our Defense Department, through the Pentagon. And that's just like a change, I guess, in American culture has become, well, the way we gain influence is by sending our military over to somewhere, not by going somewhere, getting to know the people there, getting to know the culture, and then deciding what's best. No, we're going to go in with our military and we're going to decide what's best.
I think that's what hurts the most.
I'm sorry, go ahead, JD.
I'm lagging behind, so I didn't get to hear what Eli finished saying, but my thing is kind of lagging behind. But I was just going to say, I think that's what hurts us the most, that when we intervene, we do it with military, which kind of causes countries to kind of fight back because we're coming over with this iron fist type of thing of, hey, this is what you're going to do. And if not, we're just going to outpower you with the military and weapons that we have.
Yeah.
So JD had mentioned a second ago that even in the most successful cases of American intervention, the two most successful are almost certainly Japan and Germany, where we entered the countries at the end of World War II, and they've gone on to not only enjoy strong democracies, but also significant economic success. But in those cases, we still have troops deployed in both of those countries. Given that, and we're almost out of time, so this will be the last question that we get to. But given that, do you feel that our interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan will ultimately lead to democracy or capitalism and economic growth? Or do you feel that really democracy will only be sustained as long as we're remaining behind? And JD, I'll go ahead and get started with you first.
I feel like that they will always kind of be behind in trying to create democracy unless we're really there. Because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these countries they don't have the resource like we do. So until we come with better, or Eli's military force, is to we actually go over there, try to understand the country as a whole, people going on, and not so with troops trying to intervene with the military. All the countries that we intervene are not going to be democracy or democratic view we have.
Oksana, how about you? What do you think?
For me, I don't necessarily believe that whatever we're doing there is going to be sustainable if we leave, but I also don't really know what leaving looks like for us, because I feel like we're trying to play catch up and sort of like prolonging our efforts to ensure that they don't fail. But I don't know if we're at a point where we can actually ensure that they're not going to fail, again, because what are we trying to make sure doesn't fail? But I don't think that in the case of like Afghanistan and Iraq that there's going to be like this democratic shift, and that we're going to, I just don't see, I don't feel like the population allows for that.
Eli?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we want to just continue with this more imperialistic approach to the Middle East, like, even though it's not looking successful right now, if it ever is, it will still be just so forced that even if it is successful, it won't be like a long-term solution. So I think if we want to have a long-term solution, it has to be supported by the people there, and we have to show them how it works, and we have to make it more adaptable to their society. So it almost has to be like a hybrid solution.
Ms. Wolf, you get the final answer.
To me, it's kind of a summary of what we were talking about earlier. I don't think that a democracy can truly flourish unless it's at the will of the people, because that's too contradictory to what democracy really is. And so I don't think that in the Middle East it will ever be truly what we picture it as, because in their culture, that's not who they are. And I think that unless it's true to them, it will not be successful and will not be helpful for their population.
Well, it looks like that is all the time we have for this evening's broadcast. I think we probably could have talked about this topic all night long, and really only scratched the surface and only kind of focus our conversation on American interventions. Those of you who are joining us from home, I wanted to thank you all. And if you haven't found them already, I wanted to remind you that this podcast, as well as all of the other podcasts from this semester, can be found on the CU Political Science seminar page called Perception. You can find it at www.cu2018.weebly.com. And we hope to see you again, either in previous or in our future podcasts. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.